Now let's go ahead and implement this template. So I'll right click on templates, new directory, recipe-page. And inside the recipe page, I'm going to create a new HTML file called recipe-page. Okay, and again, the same procedure as always, extends main.html, block title, end block, very important. And now we can say simply the recipe.title, okay? Now, there's a difference here because now we're fetching the recipe from our data store, okay? We're not fetching it from the search API, we're fetching it from the data store, okay? And since we're fetching it to the data store, we have this cleaner method of accessing our values of each recipe. So we don't need to say index into the 0 item and call the value because this is no longer using the search API. With the data store, we can call items directly. So it's a little cleaner. Okay, so now block content, end block, okay. So now we can actually start writing up our markup here. We will start off as usual saying div class container, just to give it that fixed width. And now we will separate the recipe page into two columns. However, the first column will be a bit shorter than the second. So I'm going to say div class colg5, so 5 columns wide. And I will add a div class row, so a new row inside of this column. And inside of this row, I'm going to create a h1, so a header 1, and call again the recipe.title. So this will be the title of our recipe. After this row, I'm going to create a unordered list of class square, which is a class I created before in the style.css. And inside of this class, I'm going to print out all of the structured information we have regarding the recipe. Okay, so this will be the cuisine, the difficulty, the prep time, and the cook time, okay? So I'm going to say list items, so li, and I'm going to put everything inside the h4 tag, so header 4, and I'm going to say cuisine, and then I'm going to print out the recipe.cuisine, okay? I'm going to do the same thing for difficulty, prep time, and cook time. Okay, so let's say difficulty is recipe.difficulty. And then the prep time is going to be recipe.preptime. And finally, the cook time is going to be recipe.cooktime. Okay? Okay, good. Now, there's a small caveat here, okay? We're going to be building out our parser in the next section, and we're going to be parsing a recipe website that doesn't provide nor the cuisine nor the difficulty for their recipes. And such is life with parsers. You're going to be parsing different sources, so different websites, and each website will provide the content they wish. Okay, and not all websites will provide the same content. So I mean, when you're posting recipes, there's some obvious information you need to provide, such as the ingredients and the directions. But many times you don't provide certain information because maybe you're not interested in collecting it in the first place, or maybe you don't think it adds too much value to your users, so you just don't actually collect it and don't present it. Other websites may have different criteria and they may think that information is useful. And so, but the point here is, whenever you're building a parser, you're actually building a system which fetches information, and you're going to try to unify this information and convert it into the most uniform format as you can, but it's not always possible just because the source doesn't provide some information, okay? So since our source is not going to provide the recipe, cuisine, nor the difficulty, we need to wrap this around a if statement, because we don't want to print out a cuisine and then nothing after it, and the same for difficulty. That will look kind of ugly. So we're going to say if recipe.cuisine, then we are going to print that out, else nothing. So we can simply end the if, okay? We're going to do the exact same thing for difficulty. So if recipe.difficulty, sorry, I have a typo here, difficulty, then we're going to print this list item out. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything, so we can simply just end the if, okay? Okay, so now this should be working for both cases. We're simply just not going to show that information. Okay, so this was the div of 5 columns wide. Now we need to create the other div, which is class call lg7. So that's the remaining 7 columns. And here we can simply create our image, which is img src. And we will say recipe.photo URL, and then let's add a style. So this will be width is auto and height is also auto. Now we want to set it to auto because we want it to have the image width and height that we download. So if this image is 300 by 300, then we want it to be 300 by 300 and not be influenced by other elements on the page, which can, change its size and all that. So we wanted to preserve its original dimensions. So that's why we're going to add this style of width auto and height auto. Okay, so let's see how this looks. Okay, so we see that we have a bit of a problem here. And this is because since we're setting the width and the height to auto, well, the image is being, this is the original size, right? So this image is huge, right? So somehow we need to get it down. And maybe the simplest way you could do this is simply by setting the width and the height of the image. But this is generally not a good idea. First of all, because the different web browsers have different ways of rendering resized images. And in some browsers, frankly, it doesn't look too good. It comes out pixelated and the quality of the image is not good. The second reason is that when you tell the browser to resize an image, it takes longer for the browser to process the page and render the page. So again, the user experience is a bit worse. And finally, probably the most important reason is if you only need an image which is, say, occupies maybe this amount of space, so it's much smaller than the original, well, here you're sending the browser the original image, which is huge. So the physical size of the image, let's say, could be 100 kilobytes, and you're sending it 100 kilobytes of data, when in fact you just need maybe, 30 kilobytes, 40 kilobytes of data. So you should actually be serving a smaller image. So in this way, when you serve a smaller image with smaller dimensions, you're avoiding all of these problems. You don't have to tell the browser to re-render or to resize the image. So the browser renders the image much quicker, and also you're serving a much smaller image as in physical size. So instead of maybe sending 100 kilobytes to the user, you're only sending 30 or 40. So the next question is, okay, how do we do this? How do we serve a smaller image from our original image? Well, if we weren't using App Engine, I would say this is a fairly complex process, because what we would have to do is we would have to save multiple versions of the same image whenever a user posts a new recipe to our website. So imagine we posted this image. So in the moment of posting the recipe, we would have to grab this image and generate possibly 2 other versions of it. So we could easily imagine, the smallest image for our snippet. So we would generate a very small version of the image. Maybe a second version here, a medium image, which would occupy, all of the screen real estate that we have here, and would be bigger than this one, but smaller than the original one. So that's 2 versions. And then the third version could be maybe the original. So if you wanted to click on the image, maybe you could actually show the user the full detailed image, the big image. So you'd have to first, figure out how to generate smaller versions of a image out of the original, which is, fairly complex. And second of all, you'd have to manage storing all these versions of images and possibly even pay more for consuming more space on your cloud service. So generally, it's fairly complex and it costs. However, the good news is that App Engine has us covered for this case, because what App Engine does, or what you can tell it to do, is to resize the image on the fly. So in the moment the user is sending a request to download the image, you can actually tell what size you want the image, and it can be any size you want. So this is a really, really amazing feature, which, makes us much more productive, because we don't have to implement all of that. We don't have to store multiple versions of the image. What if tomorrow, instead of maybe a image of this size, we want a slightly bigger snippet? Then we would have to actually reprocess all of the images our users would have stored in the meantime to get this bigger image. So that would be a huge pain. Okay, so let's see how we can do this with App Engine.